The moment Daniel Carter slammed the divorce papers down on the dinner table, I should have known the so-called inheritance was nothing but a ticking time bomb. He didn't even bother to look me in the eye when he said it, sign it. I'm taking Vanessa back to New York to settle down.
Just like that.
No warning, no conversation, not even the decency of a quiet corner. I stared at the man I'd shared 10 years of my life with, and then glanced at the woman beside him, Vanessa Tang, his so-called white moonlight, freshly returned from her glamorous years abroad. She was caressing the diamond ring on her finger with a look that screamed victory, her voice sweet as sugar but sharp as a blade. If Daniel didn't plan to give me a better life, why do you think I waited for him overseas for 5 years? I wanted to laugh. 5 years?
Try 10.
Try building a home with someone from scratch while he floundered post-graduation, too proud to admit he needed help and too blind to see the one person who stood by him. His mom, Helen Carter, suddenly smashed a teacup on the floor, yelling, "You have no background and no education. You should have felt lucky we let you marry into our family at all. Step aside, Claire. Make room for someone worthy." The same woman I once called Mom, the one who cried tears of gratitude when I mortgaged my mother's only house to pay for her husband's heart surgery, now spat on the ground like I was dirt. Emily, my sister-in-law, who once sobbed in my arms when I sold my mother's jewelry to fund her tuition abroad, crossed her arms and smirked. "Claire, if you didn't know how to make yourself useful, I wouldn't have even bothered with you."
But now?
My brother's got money. Don't cling. Don't cling? I held that entire family together for a decade while Daniel was jobless, while his parents played bridge in the garden, while Emily flitted around pretending to be royalty.
I gave everything I had to them.
And now they wanted me gone like yesterday's trash. Still, I said nothing. I just smiled, picked up the pen, and signed my name.
Cold. Clean.
Final. Good, Daniel muttered without lifting his eyes from his phone. Let's part ways peacefully.
Peacefully.
The word made me want to vomit. I remembered him holding my hand on our wedding night, drunk and giggling, whispering, "Claire, the luckiest thing in my life is meeting you." I remember him sick with the flu, leaning on me while I spooned soup into his mouth and stayed up 2 nights straight to monitor his fever. I remembered the little things, how he remembered my favorite scent and always bought me jasmine lotion on my birthday. Were those memories fake? Were they just placeholders until Vanessa came back to take what she thought was hers? And then, just when I thought they couldn't humiliate me further, Vanessa walked out of the kitchen with a smug smile, holding a cup of tea like she already owned the place. "Sister Claire," she said sweetly, "Jayajsari, Daniel told me the old house you inherited is still under your name. Since you two are getting a divorce, shouldn't you transfer it to him? I mean, he lived there all these years, right? That house was all I had left from my mom. Not big, not flashy, but prime location, and now worth over $1 million. Helen immediately chimed in. "She's right. What do you need such a big house for anyway? Just transfer it to Daniel. Think of it as your last contribution to the family." Last contribution. The audacity. I let out a dry laugh. All these years, I treated them like family. I gave them everything, every bit of love, labor, money, and patience. And in return, they treated me like some leftover burden they couldn't wait to toss out. I straightened my back and said calmly, "That house was my mother's inheritance. It has nothing to do with the Carter family." Daniel finally looked up, frowning. "Claire, what's that supposed to mean? We were married. Why are you being so stingy now?" Stingy? My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my voice steady. Stingy? Daniel, do you even remember how much I've done for this family? Or were you too busy chasing your white moonlight to notice? Emily rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. You cooked and cleaned. So what? That's what a wife's supposed to do." I stared at her, stunned. I woke up at 5 every morning to make breakfast. I cleaned the house top to bottom every weekend. I haven't bought myself a single dress in 5 years, just so I could save money for this family. But yeah, you're right, I was just doing what I was supposed to do. Vanessa laughed softly. "Let's not make yourself sound like some martyr, Claire. Be real. You married Daniel because he had potential. Now that he's finally made it, you're trying to guilt him into staying? That's pathetic. That was it. The final straw. I slammed my hand on the table, making them all jump. Enough. You people are incredible. I've never seen such shamelessness gathered in one room. You want the house? In your dreams. The room went quiet. Everyone stared at me, mouths slightly open. Daniel was the first to speak, his voice rising. Claire, don't be so heartless. I turned to the man I once loved with every fiber of my being. Heartless? You brought another woman into our home, slapped divorce papers in my face, and tried to steal the last thing my mother left me and the heartless one. I didn't wait for a response. I walked straight to the door, heels clicking on the tile like a war drum. And don't even think about that house, I called over my shoulder. I'd rather burn it than let you touch it. Claire, Daniel shouted. Don't walk away like this. But I didn't stop. I didn't even flinch. As I stepped into the night, Vanessa's voice rang out behind me, sickly sweet and biting. See, Jaya mean Daniel. We should have dumped her years ago. I kept walking. I didn't cry. Not this time. The night air was cold, but I felt warmer than I had in years. I went back to my mother's house and the moment I stepped inside, it was like I could breathe again. The scent of lavender, the neatly arranged photos on the wall, the worn couch she used to nap on, it was all still there. I collapsed onto the couch, eyes wide open, heart silent. 10 years. 10 years of my life given to that family, thrown away like an expired coupon. My phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. Claire, we're having a class reunion tomorrow night. Wanna come? It's been forever. I was about to decline.
I didn't want to see anyone.
But then I thought, why not? I had nothing left to lose, and maybe it was time to remind the world I still existed. Tomorrow I'd show up. Not as Daniel's wife. Not as anyone's doormat. Just as me, Claire Bennett. And that's how my story of revenge, rebirth, and reckoning truly began. The next night arrived faster than I expected, and I stared at my closet for an embarrassingly long time before settling on a simple but elegant navy dress that still had the tags on it, something I had bought ages ago and never worn because there was always some family expense, more urgent than myself. I added a touch of makeup, not too flashy, just enough to make my reflection feel like someone I used to know, someone who mattered. When I stepped into the reunion venue, I could already hear the loud, familiar voices and laughter echoing from the private box at the back. My heart did a weird little flip, and for a moment I wondered if I should just turn around and leave. But I squared my shoulders and pushed the door open. The noise dulled immediately. I stepped into the room, and the chatter stopped like someone hit mute. Every eye landed on me, and just as I was about to make a joke to ease the tension, I heard the one voice that made my skin crawl. Claire's here? Rachel Green, a girl who never outgrew her high school need for gossip, blinked at me and then gasped. Where's Daniel? Weren't you two inseparable back in the day? I hadn't even made it to a chair before Daniel himself, front and center, arm wrapped tightly around Vanessa, smirked and said, We're divorced. There was a beat of stunned silence before all hell broke loose. What? No way. You two were like relationship goals. I took a deep breath, walked over to Sophie, who was already pouring me a glass of wine, and sat down quietly in the corner seat. My spot. My usual survival spot. Vanessa placed her chin on Daniel's shoulder and gave me the most nauseatingly fake smile I'd seen all year. It's my fault, she purred. I came back and complicated everything. But Daniel and we've always had something special. I waited for him for 5 years abroad. 5 years, Claire. That must mean something, right? I sipped my wine and offered her a nod that said, Congrats on the mess you just walked into. Jason Lee lifted his glass toward Daniel with a grin. To true love, huh? And to big American dreams. I heard you got some crazy inheritance from a relative overseas. Big moves, my man. That's right, Daniel said, full of pride, leaning back like a smug little peacock. My great-uncle in the U.S. Left me a sizable inheritance. We're relocating to New York soon. Already found a villa in Long Island. 20 million. Pool, tennis court, the works. There were actual gasps. I couldn't even pretend to be surprised. These people lapped it up like toddlers with sugar water. Vanessa flashed the screen of Daniel's phone at the group, showing off pictures of their new homemade glossy, over-filtered mansion I recognized from a scam article I read last month. That's where we'll be living, she said, eyes glittering with delusion. Daniel said we'll open an investment firm there. Annual income, minimum 10 mil. Isn't that exciting? Someone clapped. Another whistled. I stared into my wine glass, resisting every urge to call them out. Not yet. I was saving that moment. Claire, Daniel suddenly said, breaking me from my thoughts. Do you regret it? Signing the divorce papers too fast, I mean. My grip tightened slightly, but my voice was calm. Regret? If anything, I regret not doing it sooner. That earned a few awkward chuckles. Vanessa jumped in, tone dripping with sarcasm. If it were me, I would have asked for half the inheritance. But Claire's not like Thatch, so noble. Claire's too kind for her own good, Rachel added, trying to act sweet but clearly enjoying the drama. You should have fought for your rights, girl. I would have taken him to court. Forget it, I said, raising my glass. I wish them happiness. That silence? Yeah, that was them realizing I didn't come here to cry or beg or scream. I came to watch. And the show was just getting started. Come on, look at our villa, Daniel said again, pulling out his phone and tapping through pictures. He passed the phone to Jason, who passed it to Rachel, who passed it to Kevin, who handed it to me with a smug little shrug like, don't be jealous now. I looked at it, smiled faintly, and handed it back. Looks great, I said. Totally worth the inheritance tax and transfer fees. Vanessa blinked, confused. What do you mean? I tilted my head. You know the standard procedure. Taxes, legal fees, third-party handling. Surely you paid all that, right? Daniel waved a hand. It's all handled through the firm. Legit stuff. They even mailed me the law firm's certificate. Official as it gets. I said, feigning admiration. Good to know. He laughed proudly. You wouldn't understand. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Americans are all about family wealth transfer, you know? I nodded. Sure. Sounds airtight. And then it happened. The door burst open. Uniformed officers walked in like a scene out of a TV drama. The room fell into shocked silence. One of them spoke loud and clear. We're looking for Mr. Daniel Carter. Daniel stood up slowly, his voice cracking. That's me, is there a problem? The officer pulled out an ID. We received a report that you may be involved in an overseas telecommunications scam. You'll need to come with us to assist with an investigation. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa's face drained of color. Wait, what? This is a mistake. Daniel's too smart to fall for something like that. Did you receive any calls or messages claiming you inherited money from abroad? The officer asked. And were you asked to pay anything up front? Taxes, processing fees, anything? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Sweat started forming along his hairline. It was a relative, he stammered. And yes, there were a few fees. But, sir, the officer cut in, the law firm you're dealing with doesn't exist. This method is a known fraud pattern. You've been scammed. Collective gasps erupted. The exact same people who were just praising him minutes ago now stared at Daniel like he was contagious. I sat quietly in my chair, watching the panic spread like wildfire across the room. Right on cue, Mrs. Carter, Helen, and the rest of the disaster parade stormed in, shouting. Daniel, something's wrong with the villa contract, she yelled. They just called and said if we want to upgrade to the presidential estate where the U.S. President lives, we have to wire another deposit. Tonight. Emily was breathless. They said it's a one-time offer. But Daniel, we don't have any more money. We took out loans just to pay the initial fees. They want more. The officers turned stern. Mr. Carter, exactly how much have you paid to this organization so far? Daniel's face went ghostly white. 3.8 million, he whispered. The room erupted in chaos. Screams, questions, gasps. Vanessa looked like she might faint. What do you mean 3.8 million? Where did that come from? I mortgaged the house. All the houses. Everything, Daniel mumbled, looking like he'd collapse any second. Helen shrieked. What house? Our house. All of them, he admitted. To pay for the taxes. The fees. Everything. The lead officer stepped forward. Mr. Carter, you mortgaged properties that are not solely yours. That may be considered illegal. Vanessa backed away like he had a disease. You're insane, she hissed. You lied to me. I didn't lie, I thought it was real. Daniel shouted. We're victims too. You're not just victims, the officer replied. You're financially liable. You need to come with us immediately. As the officers began escorting them out, Daniel suddenly turned his head toward me.
Claire.
It was you, wasn't it? You called the cops. The entire room turned to me. I set down my wine glass and met his gaze without blinking. Yes, Daniel. I did. You did this to humiliate me, he roared. We were husband and wife. Exactly, I said. Were. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. You're a spiteful witch. You just couldn't stand seeing us happy. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Happy? Vanessa, you really think this is happiness? As they were dragged out the door, I heard Helen screaming, Emily crying, Vanessa cursing, and Daniel threatening. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Their entire empire was built on lies, and tonight, it all came crashing down. And I was just getting started. After the police led Daniel and his precious Vanessa out the door, the reunion basically turned into a funeral, except no one was mourning anything except the money they had all just watched crash and burn. Some people awkwardly shuffled their drinks, others exchanged whispered gossip with wide eyes and barely masked amusement, but absolutely no one came to Daniel's defense. Not even the so-called ride or die crowd that used to worship the ground he walked on. I sat there quietly, sipping the last of my wine, pretending I didn't just witness one of the most satisfying public meltdowns of my adult life. Sophie leaned over, trying to stifle a grin. Claire, you knew, didn't you? I didn't look at her. I just raised an eyebrow and whispered back. The scam was practically screaming red flags. I warned them. They laughed. She inhaled sharply, the corners of her mouth twitching.
Damn.
You're cold. No, I said. I'm healed. I could have left right then and there, but part of me wanted to stay just to see if Daniel would come crawling back in through that door with some twisted apology, or if Vanessa would try to salvage her dignity by claiming she was an innocent victim of his stupidity. But neither happened. Instead, just when I thought the night was over, the door burst open again and in came the entire Carter circus, Helen, Richard, and Emily, looking like they'd just crawled through a hurricane. Hair disheveled, clothes wrinkled, eyes wide with panic. Daniel, Helen cried out, even though he was already gone. Something's wrong. That law firm won't pick up the phone. The housekeeper said the villa contract is invalid. Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. And they're asking for another deposit. They said if we want to upgrade to the presidential area, we need to pay tonight, or we lose everything. Emily pulled out her phone, frantically showing everyone a screenshot of the message. Look at this. They said we could be neighbors with the U.S. president. Do you know what that means? I couldn't help it. I laughed. Out loud. In front of everyone. Helen turned and glared at me like I had personally spit in her tea. You think this is funny? You did this. You're the one who poisoned Daniel with your negativity. Negativity, I said, standing up and smoothing out my dress. Your entire family humiliated me, stole from me, tried to force me out of my own home, and now that the sky is falling, suddenly I'm the villain for not catching it in my hands. Richard stepped forward, his voice unusually calm. Claire, you need to understand. We were all tricked. We didn't know. No, I said coldly. You didn't want to know. I warned you. I told you to be careful. You laughed in my face and called me jealous. That shut him up. And then the police returned, just in time for the next act of this tragic comedy. Mr. Richard Carter, one officer said, we need to question you and your family regarding the transfer of properties used as collateral. The mortgages appear to have been signed under Daniel Carter's name, but the ownership records indicate some of the homes were not legally his to begin with. Emily's jaw dropped. Wait, does that mean yes? The officer replied. It's possible you mortgaged properties without consent from all stakeholders. That could be criminal. Oh my God, Helen gasped, and for a second, I thought she might faint. Vanessa, who had somehow slipped back into the room without me noticing, suddenly shrieked, You mortgaged everything? Even the apartment we were going to live in? Are you out of your mind, Daniel? Daniel looked like a ghost. Sweat poured down his forehead. I had to. They said it was the only way to process the inheritance. I thought I was doing it for us. For us. Vanessa shouted. You're broke. You're a joke. You dragged me into this mess, and now I'm supposed to pay for it. You said you wanted a better life, he mumbled weakly. I never asked for fraud, she screamed, pushing him away like he was radioactive. The officer raised a hand. All right, enough. You'll all need to come with us and explain the origin of the funds, loan agreements, and account activity. If we find any fraudulent activity on your part, there will be consequences. As they escorted the Carter family out, Helen turned her head and locked eyes with me, her voice shrill. You cursed us. You jinx. It's your fault. I didn't even blink.
No, Ellen. You did this to yourselves.
I just watched it unravel. Emily was crying, clinging to her dad. Vanessa looked ready to bolt. And Daniel? He turned back one last time before walking out the door and hissed, You'll regret this, Claire. But I didn't. Not one bit. After they were gone, the box filled with stunned silence again. People looked at me like they didn't know whether to clap, apologize, or back away slowly. Jason finally broke the tension. Claire, you really aren't soft-hearted at all, huh? Why should I be? I replied. Were they ever soft-hearted with me? I grabbed my bag, gave Sophie a quick wink, and walked out into the cool night air. The wind was crisp, but my heart felt warm, strong, unbreakable. For the first time in years, I was walking away from chaos and not toward it. 3 days passed. I spent most of it cleaning the house, throwing out old furniture, lighting incense for my mom's photo, and, for the first time in a long while, sitting in silence without feeling like I was waiting for another bomb to drop. Then one evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked through the peephole and there they were. Daniel, Helen, Richard, and Emily. Standing outside my house like lost sheep. They looked awful. Pale, sunken cheeks, wrinkled clothes, dead eyes. Daniel looked like he hadn't shaved in a week. Helen's hair was tangled. Emily had mascara streaks on her cheeks. Claire, Daniel said, his voice hoarse. Please, we need your help. I didn't open the door. I spoke through it. What do you want? The loan sharks, he choked. They're threatening to hurt us. We mortgaged everything. We have nothing left. You're the only one who can help. I opened the door halfway, my body blocking the entrance. Why would I help you? Helen dropped to her knees, actually dropped to the ground. Claire, we're sorry. We know we were wrong. You're our daughter-in-law, our family. Please help us. Family? I scoffed. You called me trash. Uneducated. A burden. A servant. Suddenly, I'm family again. Richard stepped forward. Claire, we're desperate. The loan company is going to take everything. They're demanding $5 million now with interest. We thought maybe you could sell your house. Excuse me? I blinked, stunned. You want me to sell the only thing I have left to save you? You have the money, Emily whimpered. And we'll figure out the rest together. We'll rebuild. You want to rebuild with the woman you kicked out and called worthless? I said, my voice sharper than glass. You know what? Let's talk about worth. They all froze. When I pawned my mother's jewelry to send you abroad, Emily, you called me the best sister-in-law ever. When I mortgaged my house to save your dad's life, Helen, You said I was your benefactor. When I bought Daniel his first suit and dragged him to every job interview, he said I was his lucky star.
And now, what am I?
The emergency fund. They said nothing, just stood there like statues. I owe you nothing, I finished. Now get off my porch. Just then, black SUVs pulled up. Men in suits stepped out. Daniel turned ghost white. They're here, he whispered. One man, tall and wearing sunglasses, stepped forward. Mr.
Carter.
The deadline passed. Total debt with interest. $5 million. 3 days. Or we take everything. You know what happens if you don't pay. Then they walked off, leaving the family crumbling on the steps. Daniel turned to me again. Claire house alone is worth $3 million. If you sell it, we can buy time. Buy time? I laughed in disbelief. You're insane. Please, he said, dropping to his knees. Help us. Emily was crying. Helen started begging again. Claire, we're a family. Please, just this once. You said I was a drag, I snapped. You said I wasn't worthy of your son. You told me to sign and leave.
So I did. And now?
You want a second chance? None of them could answer. None of them had the right. And deep down, I think even they knew it. That was the moment I realized something. You can pour your whole soul into some people, and they'll still act like you owe them more. But not me. Not anymore. I stood there, staring at the Carter family groveling on my doorstep, and all I could feel was disgust, not sadness, not pity, just pure, overwhelming disgust. The same people who kicked me out, called me worthless, tried to strip me of everything my mother left behind, were now on their knees begging me to save them from the consequences of their own delusions. And as if the universe decided that wasn't enough, the tension snapped into full-blown chaos when Helen turned suddenly and pointed her finger at the person I least expected, Vanessa, who had been hiding behind the column by the staircase like a coward. It's all her fault, she shrieked, eyes bloodshot and trembling. She seduced my son, ruined our family. Vanessa's face turned from pale to furious in seconds. Excuse me? What did you just say? Are you blaming me? Daniel came to me. He begged me to give him another chance. Don't act like I put a gun to his head. Emily stepped in next, snarling at Vanessa like a cornered animal. If you hadn't come back from abroad wagging your tail and flashing your cheap ring, my brother would have never divorced Claire. He would have had a future. A future? Vanessa snapped, lips curled in disdain. That man thought he could buy me a villa with fake money and take me to the Hamptons on someone else's dime. Do you really think I would have stuck around if I knew he was that stupid? You knew, Helen screamed. You knew, and you encouraged it. You wanted him to leave Claire, didn't you? Of course I did, Vanessa said without a hint of shame, flipping her hair back. He said he'd give me everything. What woman would say no to that? That was it. The tipping point. Daniel shouted. Enough, but no one was listening. The three women were screaming over each other, accusing, cursing, crying. I watched the entire scene unfold with the front door still halfway open. They were like wild animals devouring each other. Then it happened. I didn't see who shoved first. Maybe it was Emily. Maybe Vanessa lost her balance, who knows, but the next thing I knew, Vanessa let out a high-pitched scream and tumbled down the stairs. Time froze. Her body hit each step with a sickening thud, and then she laid there, twisted at the bottom, moaning in pain. For a split second, everyone was silent. Then Daniel yelled, "Call an ambulance. Vanessa, someone call 911. A few neighbors came running after hearing the commotion. A security guard on patrol called for medical help. I didn't move. I just stood there in my doorway watching the scene like it was a movie I'd seen too many times to care. The sirens arrived in minutes. Paramedics rushed in. The police followed. Vanessa was lifted onto a stretcher, crying and wailing that her legs were numb, that she couldn't move. I didn't even flinch. The officers questioned everyone, including me. I told them exactly what happened calmly, clearly, with no dramatic embellishments. She fell during an argument. I didn't lay a hand on her. One officer nodded. We'll verify with the security footage.
Good.
Let the cameras speak. Daniel and his family were taken away once again for further questioning. I packed my bags that night. I didn't want to stay another day in this city, in this country, in this nightmare. I booked the next available international flight. I didn't even know where I was going yet. I just needed to breathe in a different time zone. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't budgeting airfare or planning around someone else's schedule. I wasn't someone's shadow. I was just Claire. And Claire needed to leave. As the plane lifted off the runway, I stared out the window and smiled, not because I was happy, but because I was finally free. No more looking over my shoulder, no more being the responsible one, no more sacrificing my identity for people who wouldn't even spare me a second glance when I was at my lowest. A few days later, while sipping espresso in a quiet cafe overseas, I got a text from Sophie. I hadn't told anyone where I went, but she always knew how to find me. "You're not gonna believe this," the message read. "Vanessa's suing the Carters for $2 million in medical bills and emotional damages. Her legs are broken. She says it's their fault and she wants justice." I blinked at the screen and actually chuckled. Oh, how the tables had turned. The next message came 5 minutes later. "They can't pay. The loan sharks are still circling. And now Vanessa's lawyer's coming for them too. They're drowning." And just when I thought the plot had peaked, she sent a third update that made my blood run cold and warm all at once. The Carters tried to take their own lives last night. Charcoal burning in the house Daniel mortgaged. The cops found them in time. Barely. I froze. The coffee in my hand suddenly felt too hot. I set it down gently and stared at the street outside, watching strangers walk by with smiles on their faces, not knowing that back home, an entire family was crumbling under the weight of greed, pride, and karma. Part of me should have felt something: guilt, sadness, sympathy, but all I could think was how poetic it was. They built a castle on my back, then tried to bury me beneath it. And when I walked away, the whole thing collapsed under their own weight. I asked Sophie one question. "Are they going to jail?" She replied, "Looks like it. Fraud, illegal mortgages, unpaid loans. They're finished. And everyone knows it. Everyone. The entire city. The entire country." Their faces were plastered all over the news as the newest cautionary tale of what happens when you chase easy money and throw away the only person who ever truly had your back. I sat there, watching a live stream where a police spokesperson said, "This case has been recorded as a textbook example of telecommunications fraud and financial recklessness. We will continue to use this case as public education." That was it. They weren't just ruined, they were a lesson. A living, breathing reminder to the world of what happens when you take loyalty and grind it into the dirt. I closed my phone and smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of closure. Because finally, I didn't owe anyone anything. I didn't have to scream or fight or beg to be seen. I let the truth speak for itself, and it was louder than any apology they could have faked. I raised my cup toward the empty chair across from me, like a silent toast to my younger self. The one who cried in silence for nights on end. The one who stayed when she should have left. The one who believed in people who never deserved her. "We made it," I whispered. And for once, that voice in my heart didn't sound broken. It sounded victorious. I didn't expect peace to feel like this: quiet, unassuming, almost shy at first, but the longer I stayed away, the more I realized just how heavy my old life had been. I didn't miss the noise, the obligation, the fake smiles stretched over hidden knives. I didn't miss the cold dinners waiting for a man who never came home on time, the in-laws who turned kindness into leverage, or the feeling of being invisible in a room I kept spotless. Abroad, everything was simpler. I could walk down cobblestone streets with no one judging the brand of my purse or asking why I hadn't given birth yet. I drank red wine on rooftops, watched sunsets like they were personal gifts, and, for the first time in forever, went to sleep without the ache of resentment curled up beside me. Sophie kept me updated from time to time, little bursts of karma disguised as texts. "Vanessa is suing from the hospital bed. She's not backing down. Helen and Richard tried to use emotional distress to delay their court date. Denied. Daniel's lawyer quit on him. No one wants to touch the case. I didn't respond much. I didn't have to. Their chaos no longer had a seat at my table. The world was finally spinning without me having to push it. One afternoon, I visited a museum in a sleepy town just outside the city. It was small, quiet, barely advertised. I wandered the halls alone, pausing in front of a painting that hit me harder than I expected. A woman, cloaked in red, standing at the edge of a cliff with her hair whipping around her like fire. There was a storm behind her and a clear sky in front, and she was right in the middle, deciding. I stared at her for a long time. That was me, wasn't it? Always on the edge, always choosing which way to fall. Except this time, I'd already jumped, and I'd landed on solid ground. As I turned to leave, an older woman working the ticket counter smiled at me and said, "That one's a favorite among women who come here alone. Something about it feels familiar, doesn't it?" I smiled back. It feels like freedom. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. Not on my phone, not for social media, but on actual paper, like I needed to prove to myself that I still existed without an audience. I wrote about the version of me that stayed too long, loved too hard, gave too much. I didn't write to mourn her. I wrote to bury her with love. Because she deserved a proper goodbye. Then came the headlines. My phone lit up with alerts. Disgraced heir involved in fraud case faces final verdict. Vanessa Tang awarded $2 million in lawsuit against former lover's family. The Carter collapse, a case study in greed, deception, and collapse. I read each article without flinching. The public devoured their story like reality TV. Comment sections exploded with takes ranging from, "He got what he deserved," to "That ex-wife dodged a bullet." I chuckled. Ex-wife. I had never loved that title more. Daniel Carter, once the man who thought he could trade me for a richer life, was now the face of every what not to do finance blog in the country. Vanessa, bitter and broken, was suing not just for her medical bills, but for emotional damage. She claimed she was misled, promised a future that never existed. The irony wasn't lost on me. She destroyed my marriage for a dream, and now that dream was charging her interest. Helen and Richard? Their assets frozen, their names blacklisted. Emily? Quiet. Silent for the first time in her life. The house they mortgaged, the one they tried to force me to hand over, had been seized by the bank and was now up for auction. Sophie sent me a link to the listing. "Thought you'd enjoy this." The photo of the front door cracked me up. It was the same door I'd once scrubbed on my knees while Helen criticized the streaks. Now it was someone else's burden. I debated buying it back just to demolish it, but then I thought, why bother? I didn't need revenge. I had peace. And peace was worth more than any real estate they tried to steal. I booked a trip to the countryside for a week of silence and hiking. On the train ride there, a stranger across from me struck up a conversation. He was American, traveling for work, and had this open, unbothered energy I hadn't felt in a long time. We talked about books, food, places we'd been, places we wanted to go. I didn't flirt. I didn't try to impress him. I didn't even give him my real last name. I just listened, laughed, and let myself be. When he asked if I wanted to grab coffee the next day, I smiled and said, maybe. That maybe felt like a revolution. Because I wasn't making decisions out of fear anymore. I wasn't saying yes because I was afraid of being alone or saying no because I didn't trust myself. I had no expectations, no baggage, no timeline. Just air and breath and choice. Later, lying in a cozy little inn with the window open to a breeze that smelled like lavender and freedom, I checked the final update from Sophie. Daniel was sentenced. 18 months. Reduced for cooperation, but still. He's crying on live TV.
Can you believe that?
I could. I believed it all. The crying, the downfall, the regrets. I believed that every decision they made without me finally cost them everything. I believed in karma. But more than anything, I believed in me. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk through a quiet trail lined with wildflowers. I picked a single white one and tucked it behind my ear. A woman passing by smiled at me and said in French, "Vous êtes radieux." You're radiant. I believed that too. And somewhere deep in my bones, I knew this was just the beginning. The past didn't own me anymore. It didn't define me. It didn't follow me like a shadow waiting to pounce. It was just a chapter one had closed with grace. They thought I was weak because I didn't fight back the way they expected. But I fought differently. I didn't shout, I stood. I didn't break, I rebuilt. I didn't cling, I let go. And in doing so, I became everything they said I couldn't be. Independent.
Happy. Whole.
That was my greatest revenge. Not watching them fall, but watching myself rise. And God, did it feel good. It's funny how the end of something that once defined you doesn't feel like a funeral when you finally let it go. It feels like a rebirth. Quiet but steady, like morning sun creeping over the windowsill and brushing your skin before you even realize the night is over. And that's what waking up each day became for me. A soft reminder that the life I once built around someone else's expectations no longer held me hostage. That I no longer needed to shrink myself to fit into the corner of someone else's world just to be loved or useful or enough. And as I walked through art markets, drank wine with strangers who didn't know my past, or stood under foreign skies tracing my freedom with every inhale, I realized I was no longer the version of myself who begged for scraps of respect at a table where I had once served every dish. I was the woman who'd burned that table down and built a new one out of quiet joy, real independence, and something no one could steal this time: self-worth. And while Daniel Carter's name kept trending for all the wrong reasons, former fraud convict, viral crying video, broken engagement turned lawsuit gone viral, I became a kind of unintentional legend too. Not because I chased the spotlight, but because somehow, someone from the reunion had filmed my speech that night, the one where I refused to hand over my house, and told the whole room, "You built your fantasy on my sacrifice, and now you want me to bail you out?" And uploaded it to social media with the caption, "Ex-wife energy we all need." And within a week, it had hit 1 million views, and then 5, then 10. People commented things like, "She's iconic. That's how you reclaim your power," and "Claire Bennett for president." And I didn't even know whether to laugh or hide, but Sophie texted me screenshots daily, proud like a stage mom, and said, "You're officially a symbol now, babe, divorced but undefeated." And I guess that's what happened when you stopped apologizing for putting yourself first, when you survived public betrayal and still walked out with your spine straight and your story unbent. The world noticed, and eventually an online magazine reached out, asked if I'd share my story, not the drama, not the mess, but the healing, the survival, the grace after the storm. And at first I hesitated, afraid that telling it would somehow reopen wounds I worked so hard to close. But then I realized that sharing wasn't reopening, it was releasing. It was setting fire to the shame and letting someone else find their strength in the ashes. So I agreed, anonymously at first, just a story about a woman who was discarded after 10 years of loyalty and rose anyway. And the article blew up, comments poured in, people saying, "I left after 20 years and I thought I was alone," or "This made me feel brave enough to finally walk away." And I cried, real ugly cried, because for once, my pain had turned into something more than just personal. It was fuel, it was connection, it was proof that silence doesn't heal us. Truth does. And in the middle of all of that, something else shifted to me: sense of possibility. The idea that love might not be gone forever, just waiting for me in a better form. One that doesn't come with contracts of obedience or quiet servitude, but with curiosity, respect, and ease. And it wasn't about finding someone new right away. I wasn't running into anyone's arms just because I had space in mine now, but when I did say yes to coffee with the man I'd met on the train, and when that turned into a walk, then another coffee, and then a museum visit, it wasn't because I needed someone, it was because I didn't, and that freedom made everything feel lighter, safer, more genuine. And his name was Adam, by the way, a quiet, sort of warm, the kind of man who didn't fill silences out of discomfort, but listened, really listened. And the first time he asked me about my past, I braced myself for judgment, but all he said was, "That must have been so hard. I'm glad you're here now." And just like that, I melted a little. Not because he tried to fix me, but because he didn't try to define me by what I'd been through. And weeks turned into months, and suddenly I found myself sketching again, something I hadn't done since college, since before Daniel convinced me it was a waste of time, and I started selling small prints online under a new name C. Bennett Studios, and the orders trickled in, then flooded, and I built something that was mine, with no strings, no guilt, no pressure to perform. And one day, Sophie texted me a photo of the Carter house being bulldozed, saying, "They're replacing it with a wellness center. Can you believe that?" And I replied, "That's the most healing thing I've heard all year." And it felt like closure, poetic even, that the place where I was once suffocated by expectations would now be a place for people to heal. And as for Vanessa, she vanished from headlines eventually, settled her lawsuit quietly, moved out of the country too, and last I heard, she opened a yoga studio and rebranded herself as some kind of spiritual coach, which, fine, I guess everyone gets to rewrite themselves, even the villains in our stories. And Daniel? Still crying on podcasts about how betrayal taught him to grow. Still trying to pivot into motivational speaking, but the internet never forgets, and neither do I, not out of bitterness, but because remembering is what reminds me never to lose myself like that again. And if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be living in a coastal town, waking up to ocean breeze and painting for a living, I would have laughed. But here I am, whole, happy, healed, not because life got easier, but because I stopped making it harder for myself by staying where I wasn't seen. And on the 1-year anniversary of the divorce, I posted one photo to my new anonymous account, a cup of tea, my paintbrushes, and a caption that said, "She left the table when love was no longer being served and built her own kitchen." And the comments were filled with women saying, "I needed this today," and "I hope I'm her one day." And I replied to one of them simply, "You already are," because if there's anything I learned through all of it, it's that we are all her. Every woman who chose herself after being discarded, every woman who turned heartbreak into art, every woman who said not anymore and walked away with her dignity intact, were all stories worth telling. And this was mine. And it's just getting started.